The idea was born in a cramped coffee shop on the edge of town, where the air smelled of burnt espresso and ambition. Clara, always the spark of the group, had spread a map across the wobbly table, her finger tracing a jagged line through the Bitterroot Range in Montana. "This," she declared, her eyes glinting with the kind of fervor that could convince anyone to follow her into the abyss, "is where we'll find something real. No tourists, no trails, just us and the wild." Her friends, Lila, Marcus, and Ezra, leaned in, caught in the gravity of her enthusiasm. Clara was a wildlife photographer, always chasing the untamed, the unseen. Lila, a botanist with a knack for identifying plants in the most obscure corners of the world, nodded thoughtfully. Marcus, the pragmatic one, a paramedic who'd seen enough chaos to crave order, raised an eyebrow but didn't protest. Ezra, the quiet writer with a penchant for folklore, was already scribbling notes, his imagination snagged by the idea of a place untouched by time. The Bitterroot Range was vast, a labyrinth of craggy peaks, dense pine forests, and valleys so deep they seemed to swallow light itself. The group planned a 6-day trek into a lesser-known section, a place called Blackthorn Hollow, where even Clara's map showed only faint topographical lines and cryptic warnings about restricted access. The allure was undeniable, a pristine wilderness, free from the noise of civilization, where they could test their limits and find something extraordinary. They set out on a crisp September morning, their packs heavy with gear, tents, dehydrated meals, water filters, and Clara's camera equipment. The first 2 days were grueling but exhilarating. They followed a faint game trail that wound through towering pines, the air thick with the scent of sap and earth. The group laughed, shared stories, and marveled at the silence, broken only by the occasional cry of a hawk or the rustle of leaves underfoot. By day 3, though, the mood shifted. The trail had vanished, leaving them to navigate by compass and instinct. The forest grew denser, the trees leaning closer, their branches knitting together to block out the sun. The group's chatter dwindled, replaced by a quiet unease. Marcus kept checking his GPS, but the signal flickered, unreliable. "This place doesn't want to be found," he muttered, half joking, but no one laughed. That evening, they found a clearing, nestled against a steep, rocky incline. It was a natural amphitheater, the ground carpeted with pine needles and surrounded by jagged cliffs that loomed like silent sentinels. They set up camp, their tents forming a tight circle around a small fire. The flames cast long shadows, dancing across the rocks, and for a moment the group felt a flicker of camaraderie return. Clara snapped photos of the sunset, its crimson glow bleeding into the horizon. Lila sketched plants in her notebook, murmuring Latin names under her breath. Ezra read aloud from a book of local legends, his voice low and rhythmic, weaving tales of lost travelers and spirits that haunted the hollows. As night fell, the temperature plummeted. The fire crackled, but its warmth seemed to stop short of their skin. They were joking about Ezra's ghost stories when Lila froze, her eyes fixed on the cliff above. "What's that?" she whispered, pointing. The group followed her gaze. At the edge of the cliff, barely visible against the starless sky, stood a figure. It was humanoid, but its outline was wrong. Too tall, too thin, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching. Clara's camera hung forgotten around her neck. Marcus gripped his knife, his knuckles white. Ezra's voice faltered mid-sentence. "Is it a person?" Lila asked, her voice barely audible. "Too far to tell," Marcus said, but his tone was tight, uncertain. They watched, breath held, as the figure remained motionless. Minutes passed, the silence stretching taut. Then, as if sensing their scrutiny, it turned and melted into the darkness, leaving only the faint sound of gravel shifting underfoot. Clara laughed nervously. Probably just another hiker. Right. No one answered. The fire seemed dimmer, the clearing smaller. They took turns keeping watch that night, but sleep came fitfully, interrupted by the occasional snap of a twig or the rustle of leaves. Each sound felt deliberate, like the forest itself was testing them. The next morning, the group woke to a world cloaked in mist. The cliffs were shrouded, the trees reduced to vague silhouettes. They packed quickly, eager to move, to leave the clearing behind. But the unease from the night before lingered, a shadow that followed them as they trekked deeper into Blackthorn Hollow. The terrain grew treacherous, loose rocks, tangled roots, and sudden drops that appeared without warning. Marcus took the lead, his paramedic's instincts kicking in, urging caution. Clara trailed behind, her camera now a shield, snapping photos as if capturing the forest could tame it. Lila muttered about the plants, noting their strangeness. Moss that seemed to glow faintly. Ferns with leaves that curled inward like claws. Ezra was quiet, his notebook clutched tightly, his eyes darting to the shadows. By midday, they stumbled upon something odd. A circle of stones, each one smooth and perfectly round, arranged in a pattern that looked too precise to be natural. In the center was a small pile of bones, small, delicate, like those of a bird or rodent. Lila knelt to examine them, her brow furrowed. "These aren't native to this area," she said. "And this arrangement, it's not random." "Some kind of ritual?" Ezra asked, his voice low. He'd read about such things in his folklore studies, offerings left to appease unseen forces. Marcus snorted. "Probably just kids messing around. Let's keep moving." But as they left the stone circle behind, the forest seemed to change. The air grew heavier, the silence deeper. Every step felt like a trespass, as if they'd crossed an invisible line. Clara stopped to adjust her pack, and when she looked up, she gasped. "There," she whispered, pointing to a distant ridge. The figure was back, its silhouette stark against the gray sky. It stood motionless just as it had the night before, but now it seemed closer, its form more defined. Its head was tilted, as if studying them. "Same one?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. "Can't tell," Marcus said, but he didn't sound convinced. He raised his voice, shouting, "Hey! You lost up there?" The figure didn't respond. It simply turned and vanished into the mist, leaving behind a faint echo of footsteps. They pressed on, but the sense of being watched grew stronger. Shadows seemed to move just beyond their peripheral vision, flickering like ghosts. At one point, Lila swore she saw a handprint on a tree trunk, its fingers too long, too thin. Marcus dismissed it as a trick of the light, but his hand stayed on his knife. That night, they camped in a narrow ravine, hoping the steep walls would offer some protection. They built a fire, but its light seemed to shrink, as if the darkness was swallowing it. As they ate their meager meal, Ezra spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's a story about this place," he said. "The locals call it the Hollow of Whispers. They say it's home to something old, something that doesn't like visitors." "Stop it," Marcus snapped. "We don't need ghost stories right now." But Ezra continued, his eyes distant. "They say it watches you, follows you until you're too lost to find your way out. It doesn't hurt you directly, it just makes you disappear." Clara shivered. "That's not helping, Ezra." But Lila leaned forward, her curiosity piqued despite her fear. What do they say it is? Ezra hesitated. No one knows. Some say it's a spirit, others a creature. But they all agree on one thing. It doesn't want you here. The fire crackled, and for a moment they thought they heard a whisper, a soft, sibilant sound that seemed to come from the ravine walls. They froze, straining to listen, but it was gone as quickly as it came. By day 5, exhaustion was setting in. Their water was running low, their food rations dwindling. The forest seemed to conspire against them, its paths twisting, its landmarks shifting. They found another stone circle, identical to the first, and then another, each one marked with bones. Lila's notes grew frantic, her sketches filled with symbols she couldn't explain. The figure appeared again and again, always at a distance, always watching. Sometimes it was alone. Other times there were 2 or 3, their forms indistinct but unmistakably wrong. Clara tried to photograph them, but the images came out blurred, as if the camera refused to capture them. Marcus, usually the anchor of the group, began to crack. "We're going in circles," he said, his voice raw. "This isn't right. We should have hit the river by now." Ezra, flipping through his notebook, pointed out a chilling detail. "These stone circles, they're not on any map, and the bones, they're fresh. Someone's been here recently." "Or something," Lila added, her voice barely audible. That night, the whispers returned, louder this time, circling their camp like a predator. Clara clutched her camera, her hands shaking. Marcus sat with his knife drawn, his eyes scanning the darkness. Ezra scribbled furiously, as if writing could ward off whatever was out there. Lila sat frozen, her eyes fixed on the fire, muttering plant names like a prayer. Then came the rocks. Small at first, they tumbled down the ravine walls, landing just outside their camp. Each one was deliberate, precise, as if placed by an unseen hand. Marcus stood, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark. "Who's out there?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the cliffs. No answer, but the rocks kept coming, larger now, one narrowly missing Ezra's tent. Clara grabbed her pack. "We need to move, now." They broke camp in a frenzy, stumbling through the dark, their flashlights barely penetrating the fog. The whispers followed, growing louder, more insistent. They sounded like words now, but in a language none of them recognized, a guttural ancient tongue that seemed to vibrate in their bones. As they ran, the forest seemed to close in, branches snagging their clothes, roots tripping their feet. Clara fell, her camera smashing against a rock. She scrambled to her feet, leaving it behind. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. "Keep moving." They didn't know how long they ran, only that the whispers never stopped. At one point, Ezra stopped, his face pale. "Look," he said, pointing to a tree. Carved into its bark was a symbol, a spiral with jagged lines radiating from its center. It was identical to one Lila had sketched from the stone circles. "We're not alone," Ezra whispered. "It's marking us." Dawn brought no relief. The forest was denser now, the trees so close they seemed to breathe. The group was exhausted, their steps sluggish, their minds frayed. They hadn't eaten in hours, and their water was nearly gone. Lila's hands trembled as she clutched her notebook, its pages now filled with frantic drawings. Marcus's eyes were bloodshot, his knife never leaving his hand. Clara, usually so vibrant, was silent, her gaze distant. Ezra kept muttering about the hollow of whispers, his voice a monotone chant. They found another stone circle, larger than the others, its bones arranged in a spiral pattern. In the center was a single pristine feather, its edges glowing faintly in the dim light. Lila reached for it, but Ezra grabbed her wrist. "Don't," he said. "It's not safe." She pulled back, her eyes wide. "What is this place?" Ezra didn't answer. He didn't have to. They all felt it. The weight of something ancient. Something that had been here long before them and would remain long after. The figure appeared again, closer now, its form more distinct. It was tall, its limbs unnaturally long, its face obscured by shadow. It stood at the edge of the circle, watching, waiting. Clara raised her flashlight, but the beam seemed to bend around it, illuminating nothing. "We need to leave," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "Now!" But as they turned to go, the whispers grew into a chorus, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from the ground, the trees, the air itself. The figure stepped forward, and for the first time, they saw its eyes, empty, glowing orbs that seemed to pull at their souls. Clara screamed, stumbling backward. Marcus lunged, his knife raised, but the figure vanished, only to reappear behind them. More figures emerged from the trees, their forms shifting, merging with the shadows. The group ran, their breaths ragged, their hearts pounding. They didn't know where they were going, only that they had to escape. The forest seemed to fight them, its paths twisting, its trees closing in. At one point, Lila tripped, her notebook falling open to reveal pages filled with spirals, each one more intricate than the last. She stared at it, horrified. "I didn't draw these," she whispered. Ezra grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. "We're not in control anymore," he said. "The hollow is..." Hours blurred into days. The group stumbled through the forest, their bodies pushed beyond their limits. The whispers were constant now, a relentless hum that burrowed into their minds. The figures were everywhere, always just out of reach, their glowing eyes watching from the shadows. They found more stone circles, more bones, more symbols carved into trees. Each one felt like a warning, a marker of their trespass. Clara's camera was gone, Lila's notebook was useless, and Marcus's knife felt like a child's toy against the vastness of the hollow. Ezra's stories, once a comfort, now felt like prophecies. Finally, they saw it, a faint glimmer of light through the trees. It was the road, their car still parked where they'd left it, half buried in leaves. They ran, their legs burning, their lungs screaming. The whispers grew louder, more desperate, as if the hollow was trying to pull them back. They reached the car, piling in, their hands shaking as they fumbled with the keys. Marcus floored the gas, the tires spinning on the gravel. The forest loomed in the rearview mirror, its shadows stretching toward them, but they didn't look back. And look, they drove in silence, the whispers fading as the miles stretched between them and Blackthorn Hollow. When they reached the nearest town, they collapsed at a diner, their stories spilling out in fragments. The locals listened, their faces pale. "You're lucky," one said. "Not everyone comes back from the hollow." Weeks passed, but the hollow stayed with them. Clara stopped taking photos, her passion for the wild replaced by a fear of shadows. Lila burned her notebook, unable to look at the spirals that had appeared without her hand. Marcus threw away his knife, convinced it was cursed. Ezra stopped writing, his stories too close to the truth. They never spoke of the hollow again, but it lingered in their dreams. Whispers, glowing eyes, and stone circles that marked their trespass. They'd gone seeking adventure, but they'd found something older, something that didn't forgive. Blackthorn Hollow remained, silent and waiting, its secrets buried in the shadows, ready for the next travelers to disturb its peace.